everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Tortoise Policing Inquiry. My name is Liz Mosey. I'm one of the editors here at Tortoise. I can't say that I'm delighted to be here because I wish we didn't feel that this conversation and the beginning of this, what we hope will be a long-term investigative project for us, was necessary. But I'm very grateful to you all for being here. We have 5 sessions planned today with breaks between and a lunch break. And the idea of today is to sort of put together a slate of reporting notions, priorities, ideas, the beginnings of some threads that we can take forward in our journalism. The journey to today, I suppose, for me, has been a couple of years in the making. One of the hats I wear at Tortoise is called Members Editor, and what that means is that Tortoise members write to me with their experiences and sometimes the feedback on the stuff we're doing in the journalism and all that kind of thing. I get a lot of inputs, and I noticed for the last couple of years, really since I've been here, that at a regular enough rate for it to mean something, usually female Tortoise members were writing to me with experiences that they had, or members of their family often have had, with reporting instances of crime, sometimes violent crime, sometimes other sorts of crime, to the police. And obviously this question of the relationship between the police and women and female specific crimes in particular very much came to the fore this year, both with the murder of Sarah Everard by a Severn police officer, and also questions about police culture, about the treatment of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry, who were murdered in a London park, and what the police officers did who attended the scene. In preparation for today, we actively invited people, members, to write to us, to volunteer their experiences, their points of view. And what we'd like to do after today is to sort of put together a group of people, some of them serving officers, former officers, people who've worked closely with the police, people who are just members of the general public who have an interest in this space, who can work with us over a period of time to put together some reporting that we hope will be helpful. One of the inputs to that has been a sort of survey, if you like, 150 people, half and half, men and women. We didn't design that sample. That was a sort of, it happened by accident. Answer just a number of simple questions. It's not representative, it's not meant to be scientific, but I'll share the sort of headline findings with you as a beginning, just as a scene setter. 1 in 4 of the 150 Tortoise members who completed the survey said to us that they had personally experienced or witnessed sexist treatment, either of another police officer or of a member of the public by a police officer, 1 in 4. And 40% of those people agreed with the statement that they thought it was fair to describe the police as institutionally misogynist. Now, that word fair is a really important watchword for today. What we're trying to do is to find reasons, explanations, because what we're trying to do is understand and to an extent validate some of the things that have been said about the police, typically in the media and on social media, to get our bearings in the context for this story. There is no doubt in my mind that there are challenges that need to be addressed and that need to be made plain, but there are also knowledge and data gaps that we as a newsroom could usefully fill. And then what we're not here to do today is to sort of build a dossier to substantiate pre-existing biases, should we have them. Because there's a lot of excellent work has already been done, not least the report that Zoe Billingham headed up, which sort of set out, forensically, if you forgive the pun, identifying deficiencies in the systems and in inconsistencies and missing data and making a series of really comprehensive policy recommendations. We're not here to design policy. What we're here to do is to try and identify stories that can help the wider general public understand police and policing culture in particular. And we're here to try and be fair, If you would like to participate on screen, we would love for you, please, to make sure it's your real name if you want to come in and be part of the conversation. You can choose to join in the chat if you would rather, and my colleagues throughout the day will be there. It's Imi at the moment, and other people will take the helm in the chat to share insights, to challenge what you're hearing from people on screen. We're really, really open to everybody's perspectives. If you would rather contribute outside of the public event, completely understand, please write to me. That's liz@tortoisemedia.com, and let me know who you are and the sort of experiences you might like to share. There's a lot of us from Tortoise who are listening in today, because it's not just me, it sort of matters to everybody. And I am going to shut up in a minute. So I just want to wave hello to the Tortoise Inquiry room there in the newsroom. Hello, Inquiry team, there they are. There's a number of my colleagues there who are going to be watching the whole day, taking notes. And after the sessions finish, we will sort of work in a normal meeting. You can stay and listen to us if you want to, or you can go and put the kettle on, it's up to you. But when the sessions come to an end, in the gaps, we're going to be talking about what we've heard. And there are a number of people, I know Basha and Dave Taylor, who for various reasons, like me, aren't in the newsroom today, and we're going to do it from home, but we're all on the team. So I think that's it from me. Thank you very much to everybody for being here. I'm going to hand now to the editor of our first session, my excellent colleague, Emily Benn, and we're going to start with talking about recruitment and training and reward and the people of the police. So Emily, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Liz, thank you very, very much indeed. It's a great privilege to chair the first session of this Tortoise policing inquiry. And as Liz mentioned, we are starting really from the very beginning. So the recruitment training reward of police forces, asking, are police system sexist or just policemen? Liz mentioned the most recent report by Zoe Billingham, Her Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Constabulary, said, and I quote, she found inconsistencies at every level in how the police responds to violence against women and girls and victims. Contrast this with the responses to other high harm areas of policing, such as terrorism or county lines, which are generally marked by a clearer focus, better funding, and a much better relentless pursuit of perpetrators, and a clear sense that they are urgent national policing priorities. As Liz said, we're really here to ask why. And we want to start right at the beginning. We'll look at culture, values, disciplinary processes, the politics of policing, the relationship between police and the media. But, you know, what I hope we can do in this session is have a solid foundation and ask, you know, who joins the police? Who are the police? Who joins, who doesn't? Who leaves early? Why? What's their background, motivation, their experience? What are their skills? How are they vetted? What's it like to be a female police officer? And does policing appeal to certain types of people in particular, and why? Or is the culture of the police force the most determinant factor rather than the people coming in at the beginning? I can think of no three better people to help us in this session as our key experts. I'm really delighted to have Palm Sandhu, former Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police. Hello, Palm. Sam Pollock, who's had a long and distinguished career in criminal justice and most recently served on the panel investigating the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry. Hello, Sam. Thank you very much for joining us. And Rick Muir, who's director of the Police Foundation, the UK's independent policing think tank. Hi, Rick. A tiny bit of housekeeping, but Liz has mentioned this already. Please be active in the chat. Send me a message if you want to come in. Raise your hand and I'll come to as many of you as possible. We are recording this, as you know, keen to hear from as many people as possible. But I think we kick off. And Rick, if that's okay, can I start with you, with your leading the foundation and your expert? Can you just give us an overview of who are the police in the UK? What is the makeup of police officers? Who joins?
Well, thanks, Emily, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute. I think that there's about 125,000 police officers in this country. A third of them are women, 2/3 of them are men. That's actually one of the highest levels of female participation in police services in Europe. So it's not, even though it's not representative, if it was representative, it would obviously need to be half of police officers would be women. But UK forces have done a bit better than some of their European colleagues. I think that the figure in Italy, for example, is only 6% of police officers are women. about 7% of police officers are from BME groups, and the rest are white. That's obviously significantly unrepresentative. And if you look at what it would take at the current rate of change to get policing to be representative in terms of Black and Asian officers, it will take 90 years on the current rate of progress. So there's clearly a very significant problem there, and one that needs to be addressed. And the reason it's significant, I think, representation is important, I think, in all walks of life, but it's particularly important in the police, because the police, one of Robert Peel's founding principles of the police was that the police are the people are the police. The idea that in order for the public in order for the police to do their job properly, they have to have a close relationship with the public, and that close relationship rests on trust. And it's therefore important that the police service is reflective of the communities that it's serving, and it isn't at the moment. And so that's a significant challenge. I think there's a bit of a missed opportunity at the moment as well, because we're recruiting an extra net 20,000 police officers. But the information so far that we're getting on that is that it's not really making that much of a difference in terms of diversity, which is obviously a disappointment.
I was very struck by the slides that my colleague Imi put together, looking at the pay and conditions of police, particularly changing over the last 10 years. And I wonder, with your view, what impact is that having on the recruitment of police officers, and how is that changing the force?
Yeah, I mean, the pay issue, I'm not sure, to be honest. There hasn't really been a lot of work on that. I think what we're seeing is that, I mean, the big thing that's happened over the last 10 years is that there wasn't very much recruitment because of austerity. So because essentially there was a freeze on austerity, on recruitment during the austerity period, the police weren't really recruiting as much as they were. And so for a time, we saw the age profile of police officers get older. That has now gone completely into reverse, because in one of these classic things in British public policy where you go from one extreme to the other, we're now recruiting lots of people very quickly. And now what we're finding is that the age profile of the police will get younger. I mean, and significantly younger. I mean, I think we're talking about, at least in the next few years, at least a third or 40% of officers being having less than 2 or 3 years in service. So that will be a very very different kind of police service, and there is risk in that, because you'll have a lot of very inexperienced police officers on the street. So there is a challenge there. I mean, one thing I would say about recruitment is the police have never had a problem recruiting people. The question is whether they're getting the diverse range of people that they need to recruit. So they've never, whenever you look at police recruitment campaigns, there's always plenty of people who want to join the police. The challenge is that you don't get very many people, particularly Black people, who want to join the police, or indeed get through the process. Obviously fewer women, obviously fewer Asian people as well. So there's they've not got a challenge in terms of, they've never had to worry about pay in terms of, are we paying them enough? Can we get enough people to join? It's more, are we getting the right diverse range of people to join? I think that's the challenge.
And given that police forces recruit each force, I wonder, and I'm sure that cultural differences in different police forces is something that will come through over the course of our day. I wonder if there are differences in particular that you've come across in your work between the different forces.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 43-force system, and every force, the employers and the recruiters are the individual forces. So there's a bit of a myth that there's a national police service in this country. There's 43 different policing organisations with some national architecture around it. But most of the decisions are made locally. The recruitment is run locally, and therefore, yeah, there is wide variation. You can see that there are some forces that have done better on recruitment of BME officers in particular. You can see that there are some forces which have done more in terms of things like, outreach programs, mentoring of people from unrepresented groups to sort of encourage them to apply and then helping them through the process, that kind of thing. So there are some forces that have done better than others, and of course each force faces its own different challenge, because the biggest challenge is in those forces, particularly in the big cities like the Met, GMP, West Mids, where they have very diverse populations. I mean, in a funny sort of, Cheshire actually is actually representative of its local community, but that's only because there aren't very many. It's an overwhelmingly white force, and they're overwhelmingly white area, and so therefore I think they only have 10 BME officers, but that happens to make them representative of their local community. So, I mean, in a sense that. What I'm getting at is that you need those big forces, the big urban forces, are the ones that really need to focus on raising the diversity of their intake and doing something different to what they've been doing so far, because what they've been doing so far isn't sufficient.
Are there signs that they are changing?
Yeah, I think at a senior level, there is a recognition that they need to deal with this and that they need to do something about it. I think they would say in their defense, well, we had a recruitment freeze, so we weren't able to do a lot of recruitment. But I think if you go right back to the Macpherson inquiry, following the murder of Stephen Lawrence, after that, there were targets set on recruitment, and there were clear expectations that they needed to get to a representative level. Now, all of that kind of just dropped away. And I think we need to go back to that. I think we do need to go back to a national programme of saying this is the expectation, and that every force needs to, over a period of time, become representative of the community that it's serving.
Thanks, Rick. Definitely lots of things I want to pick up on. I want to talk about the issue of vetting. But Palm, can I turn to you? Please, if you reflect on your career. Another thing I was struck by was, the number of how representation of women in police forces falls as you go up the rank. The number of female police officers that leave voluntarily significantly outweighing those of men. I wonder, with your experience, can you talk us through, the reasons why?
I think that Rick has hit the nail on the head that after the Macpherson report and inquiry and the recommendations, there was a drive on diversity, and it was encouraged to recruit females and Black and Asian officers as well. And that has dropped by the wayside, because you are still getting, the 43 forces will recruit locally, and they will have their own people recruiting. Those people who are recruiting are those 30-year PCs, the people who are old in service and old in attitude. And sometimes it's very difficult to pass their, I'd say stereotypes or their images of what a police officer should look like. And in relation to the kind of people that are being recruited, it isn't about the money. The police service has never paid particularly well. It's about people who want to contribute to society and to the community and give back. That's the kind of people that are normally attracted to policing. So the financial side isn't really the incentive. It's like nursing. You have that sort of caring attitude, which is why you become a nurse. Because nurses are not paid very well at all, in my view. So there are lots and lots of nuances there. But in relation to why do women leave, there isn't that supportive nurturing when you're within the organisation. And if you raise your head to say that there are issues, you are not actively supported in getting those issues dealt with. And it becomes a bit of a blame culture where you then become the target almost. I know that sounds really odd and complicated, but I'm only speaking from my own experience, and I can't speak for everybody, but from my own experience, when I've tried to highlight issues, I have then become the target. And I know that from the colleagues that I'm close to and that I've spoken to, that does happen a lot.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of what you've faced when trying to do that, and particularly from the perspective of being a female police officer?
One of the ways of dealing with people like me in a negative way is that when I raised an issue, 8 years before I actually left the organisation, I raised an issue about criminality and about one of my senior officer colleagues. 8 years later, he made up allegations about me, and I was investigated and I was put under the cosh, and there was nothing there, absolutely nothing there. But it was a way to undermine me, undermine my credibility. And I worked in London in the Metropolitan Police Service. And in the 189 years or 190 now, there's only ever been one Black or Asian female chief superintendent who rose through the ranks. And what the Met and other organisations, other police services do is they will recruit from other forces, but they won't nurture their own. They won't look after their own to get them to those senior ranks. And Rick mentioned other forces who are more representative. Those officers will then move around and make up the numbers and make up the targets. And when we talk about targets, in my view, we don't need targets. What we need to do is we need to stop the revolving door. We need to look after the people that we've got within the organisation, make sure that they're given the development opportunities, make sure they're given access to promotion and they're supported through the ranks. And that's why you see this glut of Asian, Black, females, any sort of difference. They're all at the lower ranks rather than progressing through as they should do.
What are the type of structures of support that would work? You know, if one were to design that?
Well, one of the things that we need to do is that when people highlight issues, they shouldn't just be tolerated and looked at. They should be actively supported, as in there should be a mentoring scheme. There should be other people that they can talk to. And when I talk about mentoring and sponsoring, my mentor was not a Black woman or Asian woman. It wasn't even a woman. It was a white man who got it. So I'm not saying that white people don't get it, and I'm not saying that men don't get it, because they do, but it's about their internal attitudes and their own personal stereotypes and if they recognize them. And unfortunately, within the police service, we all, you know, there is a sort of blame culture, as opposed to, right, this person has just highlighted a WhatsApp group that is sharing images that are not appropriate. Yeah. Instead of making sure that person is listened to and that WhatsApp group is dealt with, we then target that individual, and that individual isn't offered opportunities, isn't offered a job, isn't offered promotion. That's the wrong way of looking after people. That is not supportive.
Phil has made a very good point, which I wanted to get to, which is is the police attitude towards direct entry emblematic of an inability to be open-minded to qualities of new recruits that could bring in at any level? Is the culture, you haven't done the job, you don't get it, is his point?
Well, with direct entry, that was brought in a few years ago, and there were a number of individuals who were recruited, but that was brought in to target diversity, as in females and people from different backgrounds. It didn't actually hit those targets. And we did get a lot of individuals who had either left the army or left other senior, like banking type jobs. So they were treated with a little bit of reticence. So the support wasn't there because they didn't actually meet what direct entry was, what it was sold as. So there was that little bit of reticence. The individuals who have been brought in as direct entrants are very good. They bring other skills into the organisation, such as HR, IT, management type skills, which are really important. So you don't have to actually have walked the beat to be a very good chief inspector or a very good superintendent. But unfortunately, where we've got individuals who have got this old type mindset and are not forward thinking, that's where it all falls down. And that's where the education and the selling of these different procedures didn't actually work.
Because what you're saying is that are the models of behaviour that get rewarded are the ones that are actually just reinforcing existing old cultures, really, is what you're,
Yes, in a nutshell, yes, because if you fit the mold, if you fit into the team, you go out drinking, you join that culture, you're more likely to get promoted. If you don't drink, if you don't go to the pub, you're not part of the team. And then when we start talking about banter, if you don't put up with a certain name calling, certain behaviours, you are then seen as not being a team player. So you've got to become part of that culture to get rewarded, to get promotion, to get those opportunities. So yes, I am saying that individuals who are brought in, who join for the right reasons, sometimes have to give up their own morals, their own values to even survive, not just to get on, just to survive within the organization. I did 30 years and I challenged at almost every single opportunity I could. But there are some times where you are not strong enough, that it just tires you out, and you have to think about your own health and about your own well-being. So you have to choose the battles that you fight, and you have to be very, very selective about those.
My colleague Bash has made a point, which a good question, which I wanted to press on, which is how do you meaningfully, I mean, we're going to talk about culture later, but how in the kind of formal structures, systems, processes of promotion, of reward, of development, pressure, how can you use those to help meaningfully change the culture that you've just been describing?
That's where you volunteer to be part of the recruitment campaign, where you volunteer to do some of the interviews yourself, promotion, lateral development. So I actually was part of the boards that selected people. I was a mentor, I was a sponsor, I still am a mentor, and I'm still mentoring individuals who are joining the police service now, who joined in the last year and who are part of the recruitment campaign. And the only way that you can make that difference is by being an active role model. And unfortunately, there aren't enough role models, but you don't have to be Black or Asian or a woman to be that role model. You can still instill those positive changes by being part of that change, but you've got to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I'm interested in how the kind of formal quote unquote HR processes are, nowhere near as important as the kind of cultural ones you talked about who gets promoted and why. I want to talk about the vetting process only because, for those that have been following it, the various investigations, public press investigations have been going on recently about the lack of serious, significant vetting of police officers and things that would have stopped, some police officers behaving in a very misogynistic way had things been flagged. How do you, just a comment on how you find?
Vetting is an issue within the police service. All officers should be vetted and re-vetted, because what happens in a lot of cases is that you're vetted when you join. So you could do 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, and then you could possibly get through the whole of your service without being vetted again. But does that mean that when you join when you're 19, that up until you leave when you're 49, 50 years old, you've never ever done anything wrong? You've never come to notice for sexist behaviour, racist behaviour? That's a big assumption. And there was a report in 2019 which was done by Her Majesty's Inspectorate, highlighting that there were 37,000 police officers and staff who were not vetted adequately. That was never dealt with, because the reason for that was because the recruitment campaign was going on for the 20,000, and it was felt more important to vet the new people than it was the old people. So there are a lot of people who have moved around from force to force, never ever been vetted since the day that they joined. How is that right? No. And yet people like me, when I moved departments, I was asked to bring in, my passport, to discuss my Indian heritage, to discuss this, that, and the other. So there are individuals who are vetted again and again, but there are a lot that just slip through the net that are never vetted from day one.
Why are they not vetted, and how does that happen? And these are the lines of inquiry. I reading an interview with Sir Tom Windsor, who's the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, who was advocating random, searches of police officer to check, to look at the kind of inappropriate messages that are shared far more widely than is like to be talked about. What kind of more detailed measures do you think are required and reasonable to expect?
The detailed measures should be that everybody is re-vetted. And in relation to the vetting, to the WhatsApp messages and the inappropriate sharing of images, there is a case that's just been through an ET where a female officer has just won her case because she highlighted those issues. And instead of being supported and rewarded, she was then, her offer of employment was taken away from her. So it's things like that we should be learning. Although there are independent inquiries going on at the moment, and Louise Casey, are they talking to the right people? Are they talking to people like me and her and people who've been through the organisation and come out the other end to actually learn? And as I say, it's more of a blame culture. There isn't that learning culture within the police service.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to come back to you. I want to ask about the issue of misogyny being a hate crime, what changes that might force the police to make. But can I bring in Sam, please? Sam Pollock. Good morning, Sam.
Can you hear me?
I can, very much. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. I find what Rick and Parm has said to be substantial, really, really helpful. There are a few things I would like to cover. I'm sorry if I go on too long, but just to give the context of
course,
my working situation. I'm in my 70s, so born just after the war. And the context really after the war was men who'd given a high price in both world wars, and getting society going again. But that gave a wide context, and it was difficult for women to survive in that context. They were regarded as keeping the families going. You've got to remember family size would have been 4 or 5 children. It's now 2. And so a significant part of a woman's life was tied to the house. I remember even in the 80s, a woman, if she got married in the civil service, she had to leave. That was just a common issue, and it was only in the late 80s that they changed that regulation. That was in the principal civil service. Just a few other comments. The prison system is basically men looking after men, because 90% of crime really is by men. But men also look after women in women's prisons. And only a very, very small number of female staff would be employed to give specific physical female support.
Yeah.
And so it's rampant in the prison service. Interesting, in the probation service, we had over 60% female staff. And in the 70s, we had the first female chief probation officer appointed. But I did not see as much sexism in the probation service as I did in the prison service, and then subsequently in the police forces. So I make that comment as well. The big issue in the police, we have a public incident at the minute. It's on the media. You probably don't see it, but an inspector was subjecting a female officer to huge physical harassment and sexual harassment. He was dealt with under the internal conduct processes. He was fined £250 for one incident. They did not use the totality of hundreds of incidents. They dealt with one small incident. They fined him £250. They moved his location, and after 2 years, he was allowed to come back into the same precinct as the female officer. Now that is causing very significant alarm. That's 2021. That's now.
Yeah. Forgive me. Your immediate response to that is, how on earth is that allowed to happen?
Exactly. That's what we're asking. There was a comment earlier about health. I'm currently in charge of a trust, and nurses are. We have nurses at the minute, primarily because of the pandemic. They're working 13-hour shifts, which is a huge length of a shift. They're working 8 shifts in a row, and then get 3 days off. We have doctors in the same hospitals. They work 5 days a week. At the weekend, they work for agencies, getting 3 times the amount of what they earn.
Yeah.
Which in some cases would be the equivalent of 300,000. Now, that's in the health trust. That's now. That's 2021. So, yeah. Sexism is a huge issue across nearly all our public service, I'll finish with just some comments about our experience with the RUC. We had virtually no female officers,
yeah.
The Patton inquiry brought in significant changes to have more Catholics and more female staff. We are still under 30% female, and we cannot get Catholic officers in any significant degree. The police forces are exceptionally slow to change. And certainly when it comes to bad stuff, it just feels like the power of the law is on their side.
Yeah.
And again, the preparation of cases going into court, you will see rampant sexism in that. We penalise women and send them to prison for offences that we do not send men to prison for. Why can that happen? Why should that happen? It's just horrible. I
think, Sam, you're talking us into a much needed inquiry into women's experience of the criminal justice system, which is a whole other and a very valid point. Can I just ask a question, Sam, if that's okay? I mean, based on your experiences in very high profile investigations investigating the police, the response, the willingness to engage you found from police, from the police forces, I'm thinking particularly of your experience in the Daniel Morgan inquiry, what resistance you found and what that tells you about the cultural issues of the force in question?
Well, significant resistance. I don't want to say too much about the inquiry. That's over and done with. The report is in the public domain, but we found huge resistance in terms of access to information. If you can't get to the facts, what on earth can you do? And that was the significant thing in the Morgan investigation is we're talking about 33 years where very significant corruption was covered up. And again, how can that be? And we had huge difficulties getting through that issue, and I was particularly disappointed with the Met's conduct in relation to helping us do what was an important job. Sexism was not one of the features of the Morgan case.
No.
The corruption centered on other stuff, but we had real difficulty getting access to information on the Morgan inquiry.
Were you? This is a point that Phil I see has made in the chat too. Were you, if you thinking about the resistance and the unwillingness to engage and the kind of closing rank culture, were you disappointed with, for example, the Met's response to the Sarah Everard case and the Wayne Couzens investigation and their public reaction?
Yes, I mean, the disappointment is that they've had plenty of opportunity to learn and change, and they don't seem to have changed, and that's disappointing. We all can make mistakes. The integrity is in how we deal with mistakes, how we stand up and say, I'm sorry, got that wrong, let's do it different. But if you try to just cover up again and put up other stone walls, that's where you should be asked to stand aside or dealt with in a serious way.
Thank you very much, Sam. I wondered if I could bring in Ellie Pymont, who has been, talking about her experiences, if she's able to join. If in the meantime, I will. Palm, can I go back to you, please? If you're on, just reflecting on what Sam was saying, is that there's been opportunities to change, clear public findings on so many levels, and yet it doesn't seem to. And I know we were particularly talking about the Met here, and I am keen to make sure this is not just about the Met and how we think about other police forces, but just your reflections on that.
Sam makes a really good point there, because if you don't recognise that you've made mistakes, you're never going to learn from them. And that's where I talk about the blame culture. And every time that there is an inquiry, and the Morgan inquiry is one good example, it is about batten down the hatches, only give as much information as you possibly can get away with. And you're not assisting, you're not supporting people to actually look at what those mistakes were and learning. And that has happened from the Morgan inquiry and is now happening with Wayne Couzens, because there seems to be this leadership style, which is don't share, don't acknowledge. And unless you acknowledge there is a problem, you're never going to accept and move on and learn. Yep. And this is where the labels, the institutional racism, institutional sexism, misogyny, if you don't accept the labels and you don't say, well, look, we have got some evidence of these behaviors, how do we deal with it and how do we move on? And, we're just never going to make those changes. And it isn't just about the Met. This is about all 43 forces. And I think Sam really made a good point there.
Brilliant. Thank you. David Beck, are you on?
Can you hear me?
Hello, David. Yes, I can. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know you've got something quite pertinent to say at this point. So,
yes, some very valid comments have just been made about the difference between the top level leadership and the ground. In my experience, certainly, the top level, as soon as they arrive at the top level, their concern is more about maintaining the corporate image than actually dealing with any issues. I certainly dealt with a case with a lot of similarities to the Couzens case in my own force 20 years ago. Albeit it's 20 years ago, there are a number of similarities in the case that I dealt with the current case, which shows that culture, certainly at the top level, hasn't changed, and it needs to change.
Yeah, thanks, David. Rick, can I come back to you? David, I want to pick up on that, but I just want to, Rick, hi. If when you're looking at the systems, the formal systems of reward, of promotion, are there instances of the police where that is done better than in other places? Because I want to find out where it really is being done best.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there are some forces that do better. There is, I mean, you can look in the figures and you can look at and you can see where there's greater diversity at different levels and so on. But I think there are just some real cultural issues which occur right across the piece. I think a lot of the things that Palm was saying, that Sam was saying as well, are true. And I think one thing that's true across the whole of the police service is that it's an emergency service with a very strong kind of culture of internal sort of solidarity, and that can have a good side to it, which is we look after each other and all of that, but it has a bad side to it as well, which is that people can get into cliques, it can be exclusive. A lot of the things that Palm was saying, they're things that I've heard many times from people who've had similar experiences. And I think that there is so I think that's a consistent thread here, that there is a sort of an insularity and an exclusionary nature to some elements of police culture. I think it can be worse in some parts of policing than others. I think there are some specialist units in particular that tend to be more very, very male, and I think there are particular problems in some of those. Where there's a bit more, where the kind of macho culture, if you like, is even more sort of attenuated. I think there's some consistent themes here that run throughout. And the other thing I would say is, I mean, Sam's point and Palm's point, institutional defensiveness. It's so frustrating when you see this consistent, particularly from the Met, this consistent refusal to kind of get it, and when things go wrong, acknowledging that it's gone wrong, apologizing, and saying we're going to do something about it, rather than just pretending it's one bad apple. There isn't a wider. We're all great. Everything's fine. Let's just move on. That's the response that seems to consistently come out. And the policing just has to move on from that. I mean, it's incredibly damaging.
David, can I come back to you if that's okay? James, were you wanting to ask David something directly?
Just do the mic. Yeah, Emily, it was just because David had said. So, firstly, David, thank you for helping us understand what had happened in this Princess Shamsa case, or helping us understand a little bit of what's happened. But you started saying that the case that you'd investigated 20 years had some similarities, yes. And I was interested to know a little more about what you meant by that.
Well, very briefly, at the time I was a DCI in the Force Professional Standards Department, investigating police officers effectively. I received a complaint from a female detainee who'd been arrested in Cambridge that she'd been sexually assaulted by the custody sergeant. It very quickly became obvious that she wasn't alone, that the sergeant, in fact, was a serial sex offender. I went to Force Senior Management and said, look, we had a serial sex offender on our hands. I think I need a full Holmes inquiry team to look into it. That request was refused. The organisation, and I think subsequently they recognised that they actually could not believe that one of their own kind could be capable of doing such acts. So I was forced to carry on with a very, very small team of fantastic officers who did a tremendous job against all odds. And the similarities to the Cousins case were that the sergeant in question had been effectively boasting about his exploits in the cells to his mates while they were playing golf. But none of his mates ever chose to report this. When my team went to speak to them, they initially refused to make statements. And it was only me saying, well, look, if you don't make a statement, I will instigate disciplinary proceedings against you for withholding evidence. At that point, they gave very, very short statements. Eventually, we arrested him for the first time and took him to a local police station where he was given rights in the cell block that were never afforded to anybody else. He was never placed in a cell. He was laughing and joking with his colleagues in the cell block. And we didn't have enough evidence to charge him at the time, so he was released on bail. His girlfriend was working in our finance department, unbeknown to me. One of the things I engaged was the services of an offender profiler to help us proceed the case. He sent his bill in to the finance department, and of course the sergeant's girlfriend got hold of it and was telling him effectively what we were doing. I complained about this and said, look, we can't afford to have her doing this. She was given effectively a slap on the wrist and told to behave herself, and effectively nothing happened. Eventually, we arrested him for a second time and charged him with multiple offences, including rapes and indecent assaults. At which point the organisation went into a sort of a frenzy. A senior officer was appointed to take over the inquiry from myself. He came in, and one of the first things he said was, "We want no further victims." which I disagreed with, and in effect we went and subsequently found at least one further victim. But it was clear to me that maintaining the corporate image at the time was far more important than finding further victims, which was outrageous. We couldn't reveal what we were doing to anyone else in the organisation. I was getting complained about from the divisional commander where we took him on his arrest, that I hadn't told him in advance. Well, of course, because we don't know who else the sergeant was in cahoots with. The team was very concerned about possible Freemasonry activities, and that's a whole other can of worms which we can discuss if you want to.
Yeah.
And we had we got someone in from the, I think it was the Independent Police Complaints Commission to speak to the team, and he said that he had direct access to the I don't know what they call him, the chief grand wizard of Freemasonry, to find out if the officer was a Freemason, and he guaranteed to give me the answer to that within 48 hours. 3 weeks later, I was told that he was not a Freemason, at which point I thought, well, I've asked the wrong question. I should have asked, has he ever been a Freemason? But I never got the answer to that. So that effectively was a story. So the similarities to the Cousins case were that we have a serving officer taking advantage of his position, joking about it to his colleagues, at which nothing was done.
David, can I ask you, sorry, David, can I ask you what happened? So what happened eventually?
Well, eventually he was found guilty at Crown Court and sentenced to 18 years imprisonment. And
he wasn't suspended after the first arrest. What happened?
He was, yes, he was at that point. Yeah. But free to mix and mingle with the rest of his colleagues. All my team eventually went back to their own jobs. The only person who didn't was me. I was put into a role which had been created. I even forget the title now. It was a meaningless position, and I felt effectively I was being punished. Eventually, a review was undertaken by the Metropolitan Police, and in fact, interestingly enough, the sergeant in question had transferred to my force from the Metropolitan Police. Well, that probably got nothing to do with it. But they recommended that the initial team should be commended for their work. I was asked to prepare the commendation wording, including my own, which is most unusual. That shouldn't happen. And the commendations were eventually handed out on the last day of the Chief Constable's service, the last day before he retired, at a sort of secret ceremony in the evening, where eventually the team was handed the commendations. But that's, I suppose that's the end of the story. But
having been given in your words, kind of meaningless title job, what were the longer term consequences of your persistence? And
sorry, I don't quite understand the question. The longer
so I mean, were there any longer term consequences for your position having made this, having pursued this?
Well, again, I'm grateful to the reviewing officers to highlight that, because they came to see me in this newly created post and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And obviously words were had behind the scenes, and I was transferred to a role more suited to my skills and abilities.
David, thank you. I mean,
sorry, Emily, just one thing. What year was this?
This was 1999, 2000.
I think someone has kindly put a link to, I think, this case in the chat. David, that's quite a. Thank you very much for taking us through that. That's quite a story, quite a depressing one, if I can put it that way. I'm sure many of my colleagues will want to follow up with you on it as we pursue our lines of inquiry. I am just relatively aware of the time, in that we're due to start our next session in a few minutes. It's been an enlightening, if slightly depressing hour. The resistance to external investigation and oversight, the closing ranks, feeling has been brought out for many of our participants. Palm, I wondered if you wanted to just give a final word.
I think that David's example there of being targeted afterwards is a good example of what happens now. It still happens currently, in that if individuals do raise their heads, they then become victims, as in isolated, given jobs that don't really exist. They become the targets. They almost become the victims for actually standing up and having the moral courage to do something about it. And I think that's where the culture needs to change, and that blame culture needs to change, so that we're looking at learning from mistakes and learning for the future.
Thank you. I mean, you lead really directly into what the next session of this inquiry review is exactly on police culture. But thank you very much to Sam, to Palm, to Rick, to David, for joining us for what has been a brilliantly fascinating first hour. Liz, should I turn? Anything you wanted to say now?
Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody who's contributed to the first session. We had planned in chunks of time between the sessions that we could sort of regroup with the inquiry room, but I want to stay on track as best I possibly can at sort of this end of the day at least. So thank you very much to Emily, and of course to Sam and to Palm and everybody who kind of weighed in from the chat. We're going to keep going on police culture in the next session with Sue Fish and Helen King and Leroy Logan. So there's probably a very quick moment for you to nip to the loo or put the kettle on, but we'll start again at 11 o'clock back here with me. So we'll play some slides and what have you. See you in a minute.